The disturbing truth no one wants to admit is this: the line between a good person and a violent one is not a wall. It's not even a fence. It's a thin piece of string, and in a collapse, it snaps almost instantly. You probably think you already know how society falls apart. Resources run out, people panic, chaos spreads. But that's the surface layer. The real trigger, the one that flips ordinary, decent people into ruthless predators, is psychological, not physical. And if you ever face the collapse of normal life, this knowledge will matter more than any stockpile, bunker, or weapon. Here's the cold reality. The human brain is wired for morality only when the environment rewards morality. Strip away electricity, law enforcement, social media reputation, and suddenly being a good citizen has zero survival value. In a functioning society, kindness is a high-status strategy. In a collapse, it becomes a liability. When people realize no one is coming to save them, the survival instinct overrides the social instinct, fast. And no one is immune. Not you, not me, not the people who think they're above it. Most people imagine violence in a collapse happening gradually, like a slow slide. But historically, in blackouts, wartime occupation, and natural disaster zones, the trigger happens in under 72 hours. 3 days without structure is enough for the brain to stop caring about rules. It begins with resource anxiety, not starvation, not dehydration. Just the fear of not having enough. The brain treats scarcity like a predator stalking you, and suddenly every stranger looks like competition. At that point, the mind doesn't ask, is violence good or bad? It asks, can I get what I need by force, and will I get away with it? People don't become violent because they stop caring about others. They become violent because they start caring about a smaller group, themselves and whoever they perceive as their people. Family, tribe, neighbors, gang. The group becomes sacred, and everyone outside becomes a threat. Studies of disaster zones show that 80% of violent behaviors aren't driven by cruelty, but by protective impulses. The father who kicks down a grocery store door isn't trying to destroy society. He's trying to feed his kids. And if you're the stranger blocking the last bag of rice, in his mind, you're not a good person. You're danger. One of the most chilling psychological triggers in a societal collapse is called moral disengagement. It begins the moment someone stops seeing strangers as individuals and starts seeing them as roles: looter, threat, enemy, outsider. When morality switches from universal to selective, empathy narrows like a spotlight, bright on their group, pitch black everywhere else. This is why neighbors can go from sharing barbecues to pointing rifles at each other when the grid goes down. Fear shrinks the circle of humanity. Here's where it gets even darker. Violence in a collapse isn't driven by the strongest or the toughest first. It's driven by the fearful. The scared person with a gun is far more dangerous than the hardened criminal. They don't hesitate. They don't think ahead. They don't negotiate. Their brain is running on the oldest survival software humans ever had. Eliminate the threat before the threat eliminates you. And because collapse strips away consequences, every decision becomes driven by instinct, not identity. People don't ask, am I the kind of person who would do this? They ask, will my family live if I don't? Now let's talk about the moment most preppers never consider. The psychological shift happens in you too. Even if you think you're prepared, stocked, trained, disciplined, the collapse still rewires your brain. When you don't sleep for 2 days because you're listening for footsteps outside, when you see strangers scanning your property, when you hear screams and know that going to help means you might not return, that's when empathy starts to evaporate. Not because you're evil, but because your brain calculates danger faster than it calculates compassion. But here's the twist. You are not doomed to become a monster. The mind can be prepared for collapse just like the body. The first psychological survival technique is understanding that panic shortens your time horizon. If you're thinking only about the next 5 minutes, you're dangerous to others and to yourself. A stable mindset means thinking in weeks, not moments. People who maintain long-term perspective are far less likely to resort to reckless violence because they understand that every action shapes the future conditions of survival. The second psychological shield is building alliances early, before desperation sets in. The lone wolf fantasy dies fast in real collapse. A single person can't keep watch 24 hours a day. A single person can't guard food, purify water, gather supplies, and sleep at the same time. Small, trustworthy communities drastically reduce paranoia, and where paranoia drops, violence drops. Humans evolved to survive collectively. Isolation pushes the brain into primal fear mode. The third survival insight is controlling information exposure. In collapses, rumors kill more people than bullets. Fear spreads faster than fire, and once panic becomes viral, people make barbaric decisions not because they're cruel, but because they believe everyone else already has. If you want the world around you to stay sane longer, you have to be a source of calm truth, not fuel for chaos. If there is a fourth and painfully underrated psychological survival technique, it's defending your humanity, not out of morality, but out of strategy. The greatest long-term survivors of crisis aren't the most violent, they're the most adaptable. Rage drains energy. Paranoia burns calories. Constant aggression leads to burnout, injury, and retaliation. Smart survivors learn when to fight, when to hide, when to negotiate, and when to walk away. Your brain is a resource just like food and water. If you let fear control it, you're finished. When a collapse comes, and history shows it always comes somewhere, good people don't turn violent because they were secretly bad. They turn violent because the environment punishes kindness and rewards aggression. But if you understand that shift before it happens, you stand a chance of keeping your empathy without sacrificing your survival.